Hey guys, WestWorld Episode 2 released a little bit early this week due to the vice presidential debates coming out. So HBO released it on Thursday, and here's our review. So let's get started. So then we move on to this scene with Bernard and his assistant where they're basically kind of arguing about how she thinks that the infection could actually be contagious. Even though it's not really an infection, she's kind of treating the issues they had with the host before as an infection, and she says this could be contagious. We don't know if what happened to him could have happened to the rest of these, or maybe he set off some trigger, which obviously we as the viewer know that he did set off some trigger in Dolores and that she is in some way, shape, or form compromised. And I really like the way that Bernard just kind of tries to slide this whole thing under the rug because he knows that it was Dr. Ford, and basically he's trying to protect his friend. So we wake up and Dolores is, goes through her normal routine of what she's supposed to do, says hi to Papa, and, goes into town. But there's definitely some weird things going on with her. Like when she's in town, she starts, hearing all of these voices that I'm guessing normally that they filter out for the host. Normally I'm guessing they can't hear, the other host's voices inside of the saloon or, any other ambient noise that comes out. They only hear what they're supposed to. So I thought that was pretty interesting, a cool effect that you kind of see her freaking out about. And then she ends up running into Mrs. Pennyfeather while she's kind of in this trance, and she, whispers to her, she says the same thing that her father, Abernathy or Papa, mentioned to her in the previous episode, which was, these violent delights have violent ends. And obviously, this has a lot of retrospect into the show because of how everything in the park is violent, basically. And I am really curious as to see, does this mess with their core programming? Does this mess with a past build? Because if these hosts have been wiped like they've been claimed to be, these words shouldn't have any effect on them, because I thought it only affected them when they were on the previous version that they had to basically uninstall from all of the hosts. So I guess we'll have to see where that goes. So then we move into this scene that basically shows us how the guests get into the actual world of WestWorld. And I think it's really cool because it shows, William getting ready, finishing all of his stuff, and he walks through a door, and he's immediately greeted by this great Western atmosphere. And then you have Logan coming in from another door, and he's zipping up his pants like the douche he is. And they end up having, a conversation about how Logan thinks the Westworld is one thing, and hopefully he thinks that it'll open up doors for William, and maybe he'll come out of his shell a little bit. Whereas I kind of think that William's okay with who he is right now, and I think he's just really looking for a sense of adventure. We then move to this scene between Bernard and Ford, and they kind of start discussing their work, whereas Bernard's basically questioning, Abernathy shouldn't have freaked out the way he did, even with the reveries in his current build and just seeing the photograph. He says the photograph should not have been enough to trigger, the resulting actions that we got off of that. So he basically says, the simplest answer is sabotage. And he basically quotes the old philosopher Occam that a lot of people use in the medical division. And if you've ever heard of it, basically, the simplest answer is the right answer. Whereas then Ford contradicts, Occam would have had no idea what we're talking about witchcraft here, basically, to him. So applying those rules to the reality that they're in now, where, they're able to create basically artificial life and do all of those things. He talks about, we do the devil's work, kind of, and, you can't know life without knowing death. And I just think it's interesting the way he plays all of this, because I think deep down, Dr. Ford knows exactly what caused the issues with Abernathy, and I just don't think he wants to either tell Ford or he just doesn't want to talk about it. We move to this scene where Bernard goes to meet with Dolores, it looks like in secret, and basically they start talking, and it seems like this isn't the first time that they've talked in secret privately. So Bernard, starts asking her analytics questions, and all of these things about, since the update, he thinks that she's changed, and, that she's acting very interestingly, and he doesn't want anyone else to know. So that's why he says, delete all of your event logs, this conversation never happened. But I just like, some of the lines that are dropped in there. And I think one of my favorites is, Dolores questions herself. She goes, have I done something wrong? And, Bernard says no. And then he keeps talking. And then later on, Dolores goes, Bernard, have you done something wrong? The more and more this episode kind of treads on, you get the idea that Will's friend Logan is just kind of a giant asshole. Basically, he stabs the old man that William tried to help through the hand just to get him to stop talking to him. They could have easily declined the mission, but instead he decides to go above and beyond and be a huge douche. So he, stabs the old man in the hand and says, he has a new appetite, and he goes off and screws, these three hooker bots basically. And you have the opposite picture with William. You can see that, he isn't that close to Logan. He even says, that's not my friend, that's an asshole, to the one hooker bot that comes over and actually, tries to please him, where basically William's saying, I already have someone home, I don't need to be pleased, you are perfect, I'm waiting on someone. And obviously, I don't think the hooker bots are going to be the ones that kind of make him question his boundaries. I think it's going to be someone more main to the story, like Dolores, that they eventually meet at the end of this episode. We then move to this scene where the Man in Black is dragging Lawrence into his hometown that he learned from Kissy. And so basically he drags him there. He takes Lawrence's wife and child hostage as a threat of saying, you need to tell me where the maze is or these two are dead. So instead, all of Lawrence's cousins come out of the woodwork, and the Man in Black obviously slaughters them because he has, he can't be stopped. And so then by the end, he ends up killing his wife as well, right in front of him and his kid. And then after that happens, the little girl turns around, and she apparently knows where the maze is. She says, you have to follow the blood arroyo to where the snake lays its eggs. And I obviously have no idea what that means yet, but I definitely find it interesting. The more interesting part, I should say, is that the little girl told the Man in Black, the maze isn't for you. It's not meant for you. And obviously, the Man in Black doesn't care and says, I'll get there anyway. And I definitely want to know who the maze is actually meant for. I think that's really important, and I think that's going to play out later on. And then one of my favorite parts of the episode happens. Basically, Bernard and Teresa are just getting it on. So then after the scene in which Teddy is killed at the bar by some random guest, Pennyfeather ends up, getting ready for bed, going to sleep within WestWorld, and basically she has this nightmare dream that we've kind of gotten glimpses before of in this episode. And she basically is having a nightmare. She used to have a daughter, I guess, and they lived on this, farm in the middle of the field. And apparently a bunch of Native Americans came and, were brutalizing everyone and were killing, those around her and basically, attacked. And you think that they're going to be the evil ones in the story, but of course, eventually the Man in Black shows up, must have killed all the other Native Americans that were there trying to basically pillage Pennyfeather's home. And he walks in and basically Pennyfeather tries to kill him twice. It doesn't work. Obviously, he's immune, and I'm guessing, he either cut both their throats or killed them or did whatever the Man in Black does to people. And I definitely like the way that they kind of set up this nightmare, because then as soon as the nightmare is basically over, she wakes back up into the real world. Not Westworld, but into the real world where these two surgeons are basically working on her. And obviously she freaks out because she's never seen this before. So Pennyfeather, wakes up, grabs a knife basically, and starts I wouldn't say threatening, but definitely trying to defend herself against the two surgeons that are repairing her. And they're yelling at each other like, I thought you said you put her to sleep, and they're both blaming the other one, and she basically just like threatens them and walks out. And obviously the big question here is hosts are not supposed to be able to threaten any living creature, but there she was pointing a knife, and I mean obviously she could have ran up and stabbed them. So she's not inherently violent. I just think it's definitely noteworthy that she was able to threaten a host. And so after waking up out of this nightmare, she's obviously freaked out. So she runs outside and then runs back inside. And she doesn't know where she is, rightfully so. I would obviously be freaked out if I woke up from a dream and into a random place. And she basically walks in and she sees the area in which they kind of repair all of the hosts that had died the day previously. And she sees Teddy, who had just been shot within WestWorld. He's laying there, and they're kind of like hosing down all of these hosts in this, it basically reminds you of Nazi Germany, where they used to clean out all these gas chambers and stuff. It's really decrepit and it's weird, and she sees it and obviously freaks out, and rightfully so. And, the surgeons eventually come up and put her back to sleep. But what she has already seen and the way that they're kind of talking about it, they just think that they forgot to put her to sleep. So they're obviously going to go finish their work and put her back into WestWorld. But now she has these images of, there's definitely something other than my reality out there. I've woken up and I've seen these things and what humans are doing to us as hosts. And obviously that's going to trigger something else. My favorite scene in this episode is, Lee is doing this big presentation about his new narrative, the Red River, whatever. And, is super proud and talks about how there's going to be lots of massacres, lots of sex, and all of that stuff. And then right at the end, he already previously said that Ford hasn't, remarked on the narrative for the storyline in years. And, he doesn't plan on him, saying no to his new narrative that he's trying to introduce. And then, of course, Ford walks in and basically just says, no. and Lee doesn't know what to do. And I love the look on his face, because this is a guy that hasn't kind of chimed in on the narrative in years, and he's been kind of driving his own thing. But Ford's criticism of him is definitely spot on. He says, these are cheap tricks. The killing, the having sex. Every guest here can do that. Every guest can do that in real life too if they wanted. The reason people come back to Westworld is due to the subtleties within the narrative, that most people wouldn't have thought to actually put into this, fake world that they've created. And I just love the way that Ford basically, knocks him back, and Lee asks this question at the end, like, well, is any of it good? And Ford basically says, I'll take those cowboy boots right there. So then we move on to the scene between Dolores and William meeting for the first time. And I think this is very important, is that Dolores, since she's, gone whatever changed, she can remember things now. So I think it's very important that one of the first guests she meets after she's kind of gained this new ability is William, who inherently, at least so far, seems like a good guy, a nice guy, not someone that's just going to rape and pillage and set everything on fire. It seems like these two might eventually be paired off in some form, and maybe she'll come to rely on him, or will come rely on her. I just like the way that they bring him into the storyline of while his friend's off doing debaucherous things, William's over here just trying to play along with the game, just trying to basically get into this reality. And just the way that Dolores looks at him, I definitely think there's more in the future for these two characters. So then, to offer his answer to rejecting Lee's storyline, Ford basically takes Bernard out into the desert area that he was previously with the little boy, and says that he's actually been preparing a original narrative for a very long time now. And obviously I find this a little weird, because we, as the viewer, can't see anything around there. So I don't know if there's some secret town that he just hasn't implemented yet, or if he only has the story part ready and none of the props. I'm not really sure on that, but he seems very excited, and it's obviously in the same place with the gravesite, or the Little Black Chapel, as I call it. So I'm very excited to see what kind of semblance this has for Ford. Obviously, he's emotionally attached to this area, and I'm not sure why yet, but obviously we'll find out once the narrative gets started. So guys, that's it for the review of episode 2. I just wanted to thank you all for stopping by. I'm going to try and make these videos a little bit shorter. I know my last one was, my original review was a little bit long. It's just really hard with the way that HBO kind of shoves, so much content into a 60-minute runtime. So I'm really looking forward to doing more of these. There's definitely going to be reviews coming forward for Westworld. It's a great show so far. I love the acting. And if you guys like what you see here on this channel, please like, comment, and subscribe below. That really helps us out. And we'll see you again next time.